This video contains full spoilers for the first season of Creature Commandos. As of now, the DCU has released one project, Creature Commandos, which between its 7 episodes and around 2 hours and 45 minutes of runtime, somehow managed to establish an already more fleshed out DC universe than we've seen in live action, helped by it being animation. With just this one show, 70 individual characters of note have either appeared or with a few of them have been mentioned or referenced, and in this video, I'll be going over all of them, every single character who has already appeared in the DCU. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to help me get to 150,000 subscribers, and let's begin. Amanda Waller is a character continued from the loose canon appearances in the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, events that were both alluded to in the series, and where she was also played by Viola Davis. Due to these events, Waller is now forced to utilize only those considered non-human or monsters in her newly titled Task Force M. Waller will return in her own live-action series currently in development. Johnny Canonicity is also a character continued from loose canon appearances in the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, where he was also played by Steve Agee. His appearances seem to have been entirely canon, as he mentions having helped fight an alien invasion where he broke his leg, just like in Peacemaker Season 1. Now, he's working at Belle Reve as Waller's right-hand man. Economos is returning in Peacemaker Season 2 this year, and Waller whenever that comes out. The alien invasion mentioned by Economos was carried out by the Butterflies, the aliens appearing on Peacemaker. This practically confirms their existence, with specific characters like Eekstack, Ik Nobe Luck, and the Cow all having existed as well. Rick Flag Sr. is voiced by Frank Grillo and is the father of Rick Flag Jr., whose death in the Suicide Squad is referenced. What Flag doesn't know yet is that Peacemaker was the one who killed him. Flag had his son at just 18 years old, mostly explaining the short 14-year age gap between the Rick Flag Sr. and Rick Flag Jr. actors. Flag leads the Commandos until he's replaced by the Bride, setting him up to potentially have a lesser role in Season 2. He's also heavily injured by Clayface, but is currently recovering and will be fine enough to be fully active in a small appearance on Superman and large role in Peacemaker Season 2, where he will almost certainly find out about Peacemaker killing his son. Rick Flag Jr. was mentioned, confirming his existence in this world and his appearance in the Suicide Squad being canon. I think if he ever returns, he will be played by Joel Kinnaman. He and Weasel are mentioned to have taken part in something called Project Starfish in Corto Maltese, which practically confirms Star Ro's role in those events. Weasel is a character continued from a loose canon appearance in the Suicide Squad, where he was also voiced by Sean Gunn. In the comics, Weasel is a Firestorm villain. That doesn't seem to be the case here though, although he definitely is an enemy of fire. Weasel is revealed to not have killed any kids, contrary to what both father and son Flag said in both of his appearances. His design also seems to have been tweaked a bit to give him larger, more cutesy eyes, although that might just be an art style choice. Weasel is very much alive and will return for Season 2. Alongside Weasel, another Firestorm villain appeared in the season, although in a very small cameo. As hinted at by Dr. Phosphorus, this is a hyena and most likely a character named Summer Day, aka Hyena, who is an enemy of Firestorm and despite her appearance is female. Attempting to come to Weasel's defense was Elizabeth Bates, voiced by Linda Cardellini. This is the first ever adaptation of a character named Betty Bates, a New York City based lawyer in the Quality Comics universe, appearing exclusively between 1940 and 1950 in the comics before DC purchased Quality Comics, an insane deep cut. Bates is still alive, and seeing as Weasel is still around, we'll likely see her again. Arguably the main character of the season, certainly by the end of it, the Bride, or the Bride of Frankenstein, is voiced by Indira Varma and is a nearly 200-year-old stitched together corpse created by Victor Frankenstein at the request of his other creation, Eric, who's been chasing her for those 2 centuries. The Bride seems to have super strength and all that comes with that, doesn't age and can't die, and is also proficient with weaponry. In the present, she's in Argus custody and is the leader of the Creature Commandos going into Season 2. Eric Frankenstein, voiced by David Harbour, is a tad bit older than the Bride, although it's unclear by how much, making him also somewhere near 200 years old. He also has all the same superhuman abilities, and I don't think he's mentally incapable, but he does feel a lot less human than the Bride, in how he speaks, how he thinks, and even his size. He kinda has the emotional capabilities of like a baby. Eric is still very much alive and still has the same goal as always, just to chase after the Bride. Along the way, in the 1830s, Eric befriended, was healed back to health by, and then killed an elderly Romani blind woman named Bogdana, an original character voiced by Irina Maliva. The 2 Frankensteins were created by Victor Frankenstein, who was born in the 1790s and died at the hands of his first creation, Eric, in 1831, shortly after he created the Bride, due to his affair with the Bride. He was voiced by Peter Serafinowicz, and he also had a wife, who was never named or shown. Nina Mazursky was voiced by Zoe Chow and was a human born in Star City with fatal defects to scientist Edward Mazursky, who then genetically modified her, turning her into a fish woman woman who can breathe underwater but not on land. This origin is an entirely original one, as her comic origins depict her simply being born into a monster village in Romania and then adopted by someone named Myron Mazerski. Along the way, Nina befriended G.I. Robot and the Bride, but unfortunately died at Ilana Rostovic's hands. I don't think we will ever see her again. Nina Mazerski's father in the comics was only ever given a name in the Flashpoint timeline, which is where she originates. There, his name is Myron. For whatever reason, they changed it here to Edward Mazerski. Also different from the comics is that he is her biological father rather than adopted, and also different from the comics, which predates Nina Mazerski by a lot. Professor Mazerski was the creator of the Creature Commandos. Here he has no affiliation with them at all, aside from his daughter being a future member. Edward was voiced by Greg Henry and is currently deceased, having been killed by the Star City Police. Nina's mother is named Lily Mazerski and is voiced by Joy Osmansky. No version of Nina in the comics ever had a mother mentioned, nor did Professor Mazerski ever have a wife mentioned, so Lily is an original character. Her current status is unknown, as she abandoned her husband and daughter when Nina was a baby, but she's likely alive. Alex Sartorius is the Batman villain Dr. Phosphorus, voiced by Alan Tudyk, who has his origin from the comics adapted, but in a more tragic way. Like the comics, he's thrown into a radioactive core by Rupert Thorne, turning him into what he is. In this version, however, he has a wife and son, who are both murdered by Thorne and his gang. Also, unlike the comics, Phosphorus then turns himself into a mob boss, taking over Thorne's operations, before ultimately being defeated by the Batman. Phosphorus mentions not having been touched for 15 years, placing his transformation in the late 2000s and Batman's career as being longer than expected. Phosphorus is alive and will return in season 2. Phosphorus' wife is named Parvin Sartorius and is voiced by Parisha Fakhri and was killed by Rupert Thorne's gang. She is an original character, as is their son together, who is unnamed and also killed by Rupert Thorne. Speaking of, Rupert Thorne is another Batman villain and was voiced by Ben Davis. Thorne was responsible for Dr. Phosphorus' villain origin, which in turn led to his own demise, as he was killed alongside his wife and 2 kids by Phosphorus. Despite being dead, I could see Thorne popping up in projects that don't take place in the present, like maybe Clayface. Speaking of, Clayface is also voiced by Alan Tudyk and is clearly known enough to be recognized immediately by both Flag and Economos. Aside from that, his design, powers, and the fact that he was hired by Ilana Rostovic, we don't know much about this Clayface, including his name or if he's the one appearing in the movie. What's interesting is that he did a really poor job at acting like Isla McPherson, which suggests that he isn't Basil Karlo, famously an actor, and is Matt Hagen. This is further suggested by how dead this Clayface seems to be, having been electrocuted and exploded by Eric Frankenstein, and still exploded a little bit later. It's not confirmed, but Clayface was almost certainly collected by Argus. Maybe he'll even appear in season 2, or maybe he is indeed dead. The woman he impersonated was Isla McPherson, who in the comics is the history teacher at Gotham Academy. Here she was given a slightly different spelled name, adding an A to Isla, and made an expert on Themyscira, living in Louisiana. After backing up Cersei's claim, she was killed and replaced by Clayface at the order of Ilana Rostovic. In a blink and you miss it appearance, another Batman villain cameoed in this show. This is Orca, who in the comics is the alter ego of Grace Balin, whose origin involves splicing her DNA with that of an orca, much like Nina Mazerski, but having done it to herself. Orca is alive and in Argus custody. One final Batman villain was referenced, as we see a nudie mag parody of the Riddler during Phosphorus' origin, which makes sense since Riddler is an early years Batman villain and this takes place 15 years ago. This all leads back to Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, who appeared at the end of Dr. Phosphorus' backstory, turning up the lights and standing in a badass pose in front of the lightning of the night sky. From the villain's appearances and lines of dialogue, we could gather that he's been around for 15 plus years, has faced off against Clayface, Dr. Phosphorus, Orca, and possibly Riddler. Batman will go on to appear in Batman Brave and the Bold, as well as possibly Clayface, and depending on if it's in the DCU, dynamic duo. Getting back to the Commandos, G.I. Robot is voiced by Sean Gunn, was a robot created in 1943 to help fight the Nazis in World War II, which became his one and only goal. He was a member of Easy Company, was studied by Will Magnus, which led to the creation of the Metal Men, befriended a man named Sam, who turned out to be a member of the neo-Nazi group of Hub City. G.I. Robot was eventually destroyed by Cersei as a member of the Creature Commandos. Fortunately, he's a robot, so he was just rebuilt not too long after, in a far larger body, although it's unclear if he remembers the events of this season or not. As mentioned, G.I. was a member of Easy Company, a group of soldiers from the comics who fought in the European theater of World War II. Their leader is Sergeant Franklin Rock, voiced by Maurice Sterling. There seems to be a Sergeant Rock movie in development with Daniel Craig in talks to star. It's likely all of these members will appear. Rock and all the other members are likely deceased in the present, but nothing is known about their statuses past 1943, aside from Will Magnus not having heard of them in the 60s. The other members include Horace Canfield, aka Bulldozer, played by Paul Ben Victor, Louis King, Kiani, aka Little Sure Shot, voiced by Robbie Damon. Then there's Harold Shapiro, aka Wildman, Canary, Four Eyes, and many other unnamed members. GI also mentions Bogman, a creature of the Black Lagoon type monster from the comics who is a member of the Creature Commandos and has a total of 3 comic appearances. Maybe Easy Company had a second non-human member. As mentioned, GI was taken in by Will Magnus. Will is voiced by Alan Tudyk and is around during the 60s, where he uses GI Robot to find the missing piece to complete his Metal Men project, or what he calls the future of automatons. His current status is unknown, but he's likely deceased or at least very old. We don't see the Metal Men themselves, but they were teased as we see the symbols of each member on Magnus's blueprint. From left to right are the symbols of mercury, tin, lead, iron, gold, and platinum. Seeing as they're robots, they are likely still around in the present day somewhere. Further hinted at by the appearance of Chemo in Argus custody. Chemo is typically a far larger monster made entirely out of toxic chemicals and radioactive waste. He's also typically the archenemy of the Metal Men. The series ended with 3 more monsters being added to the ranks of the Creature Commandos, including Nosferatu, a Superboy villain with only 8 comic appearances, but also 1 animated movie appearance. Her origin involves being turned into a vampire in the 1940s by a mad scientist's animal splicing-based experiments. That scientist also created many more creatures by splicing in animal DNA into people like tigers, gorillas, dogs, and others, with a group of people called the Wild Men. Maybe we'll see that, but also Gunn already did that exact thing in Guardians 3, so maybe not. Nosferatu had no lines, so she's yet to be cast, but will definitely be in season 2. The same goes for Callus, or Khalees, we'll find out how to pronounce that. He has a few more comic issue appearances than Nosferatu, and even was a member of the Creature Commandos, his design being based on his Future's End design. That version of Khalees has an unknown origin. I'm sure they'll come up with a new one anyway, and he will certainly be an ancient Egyptian mummified and recently resurrected into a mummy. By far the most important of these is Nanaue, aka King Shark, a decently prominent character with 300 plus comic appearances and many outside media appearances, including one in The Suicide Squad where he was voiced by Sylvester Stallone. This continues that appearance, retroactively making it canon, although here he was voiced by Diedrich Bader. King Shark, like Nosferatu, originated as an enemy of Superboy, but is more so than anything used as a member of the Suicide Squad. His origin might be changed up a bit for the show, but in the comics, and as alluded to in the Suicide Squad, Nanaue is the demigod son of the god of sharks Kondraka and a human woman named Kaikia. Coincidentally, early on in the comics, it was implied he might have had the same origin as Nosferatu, having been a part of that group, but they've since fully and entirely embraced the demigod origin, which will almost certainly be the case here as well. King Shark, now a member of the Creature Commandos, will return in season 2. Many villains unrelated to any of the Commandos appeared in the show as well, most prominently being Princess Ilana Rostovic, an original character voiced by Maria Bakalova, and now dead, having been killed by the bride. Unfortunately, we learned just about nothing about this character aside from her being the princess and soon-to-be queen of Pakolistan, and her somehow eventually teaming up with Gorilla Grodd to take over the world in a now seemingly diverted future, which I'll return to. Alongside Ilana, a few guards were given some character, including Alexei, voiced by Julian Kostov, who was killed by Dr. Phosphorus, and then replaced by Sergei, who was also voiced by Julian Kostov, and who survived the season. The main antagonist for the first few episodes is Cersei, or Cersei, a very prominent Wonder Woman villain voiced by Anya Shalatra. In this series, her motives seem to have been pure, however. Having received a vision of the future of Ilana taking over the world, she sets out to kill her before she can. The last we saw her, she was in Argus custody and had a Dr. Phosphorus handprint burn on her face. She can probably recover from that with her magic, but maybe not. Maybe this is now her design. Although probably not, because she didn't really seem to care that much. Cersei was joined by the Sons of Themyscira, a group of men against the idea of Themyscira as a whole because it doesn't allow men, who helped Cersei in exchange for the promise of her bringing them to Themyscira. They are, I think, all dead except for one of the 2 named members, Tanner, voiced by Alan Tudyk, who we just didn't see die, as well as critical skeptic Facts Over Feeling 91, voiced by Tony Cavallero, who was killed by the bride. Both are original characters. Many obscure DC villains cameoed in this series, many of them hinting at unconfirmed DC heroes or groups. Kongorilla is voiced by Jason Konospios, a character who in the comics is a hero and at one point a member of the Justice League, a man named William Glenn Morgan, or Congo Bill. At some point, he acquired a magical ring that allowed him to switch consciousnesses with a magical golden gorilla, a switch that then became permanent after the original Bill died, with the gorilla's consciousness inside it. None of this was confirmed for the series, and Kongorilla was changed into a villain and a bit of an asshole, for which he was seemingly killed by the bride. This might be cause for contention between the bride and Nosferatu in season 2, given her reaction to his death. Other villains were no more than cameos, like the Justice League villain Shaggy Man, a giant hairy monster created by a mad scientist, although this hasn't 100% confirmed to be him and he looks a lot smaller. The Fisherman is an Aquaman villain who uses tech in a suit to fight Aquaman, with it later being suggested that he's actually several men controlled by an alien parasite. Then is Sven Larsson, aka the Animal Vegetable Mineral Man, an enemy of the New Patrol who gained the powers to transform any of his body into some form of animal, vegetable, or mineral after falling into a vat of acid. The Crimson Centipede is a Wonder Woman villain originating in the 1960s who was created by Ares, called Mars at the time, just to destroy Wonder Woman. This Eggman is the Wonder Woman villain Egg Fu, aka Cheng Tsu, a Chinese man and genius scientist who looks like an egg for what appears to be no reason. This bug-eyed bandit is the Atom villain Bertram Larvin, aka the Bug-Eyed Bandit, although changed from wearing a costume and using robot insects into being a metahuman with actual bug eyes. The rest of the monsters in Argus custody are original characters as far as we can tell. This Duck Cyclops was confirmed by James Gunn to be wholly original, simply put in by the animators. This demon guy looks like a gray Etrigan, but that doesn't really fit any specific character. There's this guy we don't see enough of to identify, this smiley guy who doesn't really fit anyone specific, and this slimy dude, as well as this bug woman, who also don't really fit anyone specific. The show also included two more original villains, both with lightning powers and both killed by the Bride, known as the Craik brothers. Patty Craik is voiced by Luke Cook, and Brian Craik is voiced by Russ Bane. The Green Lantern villain Star Sapphire was referenced in the same Noonie Mag as the Riddler, suggesting that she was already around 15 years ago, which isn't surprising given that Hal Jordan will be 60 years old in 2026. Carol will likely be around the same age, and around for a while. And finally, episode 4 featured Cersei's vision of the future, which featured the appearances of 15 heroes, all of whom died, and one villain. I saved this for now because of the nature of it being a vision of a possible, now seemingly erased future. These versions of the characters will not exist, and since it's the future and we don't know how far in the future, they don't necessarily exist in this way yet. A good example of this is that we see Damian Wayne, aka Robin, who likely does exist, but has not yet become Robin. What this means is that these can be considered separate versions of those characters to those who are going to appear, or in Batman's case, already did. There's Clark Kent / Kal-El, aka Superman, whose alternate version will appear in Superman, and Kara Zor-El, aka Supergirl, whose ult will appear in both Superman and Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. Bruce Wayne, aka Batman's ult, appeared 2 episodes later, but would also appear in Batman Brave and the Bold alongside Damian, as well as maybe Clayface and Dynamic Duo. Then there's Diana Prince, aka Wonder Woman, Wally West, aka The Flash, Guy Gardner, aka Green Lantern, whose ult will appear in Superman and Lanterns, Kendra Saunders, aka Hawkgirl, whose ult will appear in Superman, alongside Michael Holt, aka Mr. Terrific. Then there's Coriander, aka Starfire, whose ult will almost certainly appear in Teen Titans, Michael Carter, aka Booster Gold, whose ult will appear in Booster Gold, Jaime Reyes, aka Blue Beetle, as well as Kajida, the first DCU appearances of the characters originating in the loose cannon project Blue Beetle. Their ults will appear in the Blue Beetle animated series. Then there's 3 characters who appeared in the loose cannon project Peacemaker Season 1 and will appear in Peacemaker Season 2, those being Adrian Chase, aka Vigilante, Judo Master, and Christopher Smith, aka Peacemaker, who also appeared in the loose cannon project The Suicide Squad. Finally are the villains of this vision, Ilana Rostovich and Gorilla Grodd. Gorilla Grodd does not have any future appearances confirmed and has not yet appeared in the actual DCU, but absolutely will. It has yet to be explained what he was doing here and how he's connected to Ilana Rostovich. The actual final category are all the characters who appeared in loose canon projects but have yet to be confirmed to have existed in the DCU, meaning their current canonicity is in question, as is the actors who are attached to them. A few characters have been confirmed to return but just haven't yet, which includes Daniel Brooks as Leota Adebayo, Jennifer Holland as Amelia Harcourt, Robert Patrick as Augie Smith, and D. Bradley Baker as Eagly. The loose canon characters from the Suicide Squad include Savant, played by Michael Rooker, TDK, played by Nathan Fillion, Captain Boomerang, played by Jai Courtney, Javelin, played by Flula Borg, Mongal, played by Mei Ling Ing, Blackguard, played by Pete Davidson, Harley Quinn, played by Margot Robbie, Bloodsport, played by Idris Elba, Tyler Dubois, played by Storm Reed, Ratcatcher, played by Taika Waititi, Ratcatcher 2, played by Danielle Melchior, Sebastian the Rat, played by D. Bradley Baker, Polka Dot Man, played by David S. Mulchin, Kaleidoscope, played by Natalie Safran, Calendar Man, played by Sean Gunn, Double Down, played by Gerald Leland Gore, Karma, played by Nick Paget, The Thinker, played by Pete Capaldi, Sol Saria, played by Alice Braga, and Flo Crowley, played by Tinashe Kajis. All the characters of note from Peacemaker have either already returned or are confirmed to return or are original characters, so I'm only going to mention a bunch of characters who were referenced on Peacemaker whose references confirm their existence, except those references are not necessarily canon. This includes Batmite, Dollman, Matter Eater Lad, Mad Hatter, Kite Man, The Flash, which seemed to be the Barry Allen version, Aquaman, and Green Arrow. From Blue Beetle, there are a few characters who were referenced, like Fire Fist and the Dan Garrett version of Blue Beetle, and then many more appeared, like Ted Cord, played by an uncredited actor, Bruna Marquezine as Jenny Cord, Elpidio Carrillo as Rocio Reyes, Damian Alcazar as Alberto Reyes, Adriana Barraza as Nana Reyes, George Lopez as Rudy Reyes, Belissa Escobedo as Milagro Reyes, Susan Sarandon as Victoria Cord, and Raul Trujillo as Ignacio Carapax, aka OMAC. And so that is it. As of now, around 60 different characters have been adapted into the DCU, alongside 20 different original characters of note, 8 characters who are referenced, 27 characters who are currently in loose canon continuity, and 9 characters who are referenced in loose canon continuity.